Hi, as always, Dan Veal here, and in Bass Gear magazine this month we are looking at the EBS Reidmar 752. The younger brother to the Reidmar 750, this all-new model provides some really cool upgrades and some great features. Let's take a look. Let's waste no time. Zooming into the front panel then, we can immediately see that it's nice and neatly laid out, and with the white lettering against the dark background, we know that we're going to be able to read this on a darkened stage. Left hand side, input jack here. This is good for a 1 megohm impedance. This means that it's compatible with all sorts of active and passive instruments. To the right of the input jack, we have the character button. This is a pre-shape EQ. I'll put the details up on the screen now of what the exact frequency centers are, but essentially we've got a bump in the bass end, a bump in the treble end, and a slight dip in the mid-range. This, in my previous reviews when I've looked at EBS gear, I've called my big cab sound. It's absolutely superb for creating an immediate depth and low-end girth to my tone without actually having to learn about EQ. We better hear it, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bypass all of the other EQ and functions on the amplifier, leaving us with just my instrument and the speaker, essentially. And then I'm going to pop the character control in so you can hear that. Here's the character control disengaged. And engaged. You can immediately hear that with the control engaged, there's some extra depth coming into the sound, and the top end sparkle from these fairly new strings is really apparent in the room. Now, of course, you are going to be listening to this on some decent speakers, some decent headphones, and not little earbuds or mobile device speakers. You're just not going to hear any sort of low end from those whatsoever, and you're not going to be enjoying the wonderful sound that I'm enjoying in the room. So get your ears around some decent earphones and we can hear what this amplifier is doing. To the right of the character switch, we have the gain control. This is setting the level going into the amplifier. Now it's very important that we get a nice strong signal going in for the features on board. And if we start pushing it a little bit too far, we have got a peak LED here. Ideally, when I play notes, I want to set my gain control so this just flashes every now and then. This means that functions such as the onboard compressor are going to be getting a decent signal in order for it to be able to do its work efficiently as well. And in speaking of which, let's have a look at the onboard compressor. It is a one knob compressor. I'm going to put the specifications up on screen for you. And by dialing the control round, we can progressively add more and more compression or control to our sound. Now for me personally, I found that I like to use this compressor just to tidy up my sound. However, when you push the control further and further around, your sound will become more and more compressed, and you could use that more as an effect. This is what the compressor sounds like at the 12 o'clock position with the sound that I was just playing a moment ago. Now whilst I was playing, I couldn't see if the threshold LED next to the knob was flashing to tell me that the compressor was kicking in. Certainly with some slap bass styles, we should see that happen. Pushing the compressor further up then, and listening through decent speakers, we should be able to hear my overall sound being tamed between my quieter passages and my louder passages. And maxed out for good measure, this is what it sounds like. With this particular configuration, with this particular bass, actually the sound still sounds fairly clear. I can hear the compressor kicking in and slowly pulling my dynamic range tighter and tighter and tighter together, but actually even on its maximum setting with this particular instrument, still sounds pretty good to me. We've got a lot to get through, so let's not waste any more time. Let's get on and have a look at the fully featured equalizer section. Now, as I mentioned in my introduction, talking about the character button, I can disable the onboard EQ altogether. And we've got a little button here with an LED on the top of it, like the character control. And I can switch this on and off, and that enables the EQ section. If I turn it off, this is what my bass sounds like, with no equalization on it at all. Just the sound of the DI and the mic'd up cabinet. My EQ settings you can see on the screen now. I'm going to engage the equalizer, and here we go. Reidmar 752 has a 4-band equalizer. We have active bass, active middle, active treble, and a bright filter. We're going to do each of those in turn so I can have a look at them. In my little musical excerpt there, I had these particular settings, but I might want to add some extra low end, and actually there's a lot of cut and boost on each of these controls, so a little turn of the knob will actually go a long way. Here's the bass control, and I'm going to boost that up and we can listen to what that does to my sound. Let's go around to about the 2 o'clock position. A bit of 5-string action there again, and you can really hear, indeed I can feel the lows happening in the studio here. It's a big sound. Cutting away the bass, if I've got a really boomy stage or a bass with a lot of low end on it, I might just pull back the bass end a little bit, but as I said, there is a lot of cut and boost available. So even on this setting, I'm probably going to find that a lot of my low end has now been scooped away. Okay, so you can immediately hear that there's a lot of cut there from the bass control, and even with a small movement, I've actually taken away quite a lot of my bass sound weight. So me personally, unless I've got a very bassy rig, I'm unlikely to cut away that much low end. Moving on then, this is something I want to see on practically every amplifier, is the ability to select what frequency my EQ actually acts on. So with 752, we have what's called a semi-parametric mid-range. I have cut and boost here, and then I can select the frequency that I'm cutting and boosting. Now if I just flatten out my bass control for a moment and come back here, I can see at the moment I'm scooping away somewhere around the, I'm going to sort of guesstimate here, about 400 to 500 hertz, somewhere in that region. That's a very, very typical mid-range scoop that you might find on passive tone stacks, for example. And it gives me that lovely, bigger cabinet sort of sound. I can cut away some of the boxy mid-range. But you know what? I might be playing a little bit of fingerstyle and I really want to cut through. So what I could do is actually dial round to over 600 hertz, maybe 700-800 hertz region, and just boost that up a little bit. And I'm going to get a really nice accentuated upper mid-range. Maybe I want to come around and add a bit more of a dubby kind of sound, and I'm going to move away from the mid-range and start heading towards the bass range. And I'm going to boost that up for a more low-end bloom kind of tone. I'm not searching for words today. Okay, here we go. Boosting up the bass end as well. I'm going to have to watch my levels here. In the room, it sounds like there's a lot of mass in my tone when I start accentuating those frequencies, getting down towards 100 hertz. These are very, very important frequencies for us as bass players. Somewhere between the 80 and 400 hertz region is kind of where we do most of our heavy lifting, as it were. Again, having this semi-parametric equalizer on board means I can dial in and find those sweet spots. On to the right hand side of that, we have the treble control, and this again is an active control, and at 0 it is not cutting or boosting, and this allows me to take instruments that may be a little bit too bright and cut their top end, or maybe a passive instrument when I want a little bit more plectrum attack. I can start pushing up the treble control and getting that bite into my sound. Here's a typical EQ setting, and I've left the treble at the 12 o'clock position so you can hear what it sounds like essentially out of the circuit. Let's push that treble control up just a little bit and then grab a plectrum. Or maybe we want a nice smooth jazzy kind of sound. Let's get hold of that treble control, pull it all the way back, A favour playing near the bridge on the bass guitar, and it sounds like this. The added brightness can be really useful for fingerstyle playing. As well as a little bit of slap bass. If you're playing a passive instrument and you're short of that top end airy sound that we like from a certain well-known jazz bass playing bassist, over here on the right hand side we have the bright control. This is a high pass filter, and as we progress the control from 0 upwards, we're getting a very top end boost, which adds air and clarity to my sound, and this is very, very useful if I'm using speaker cabinets with tweeters in. Let's have a little listen to what that sounds like. And for lots and lots of clarity, let's push the bright round, add a bit of treble, and head to harmonic land. With an active bass with fairly new strings on, it's easy to push it a little bit too far, but with some little bit of effects on there, you get a really nice luscious tone if you're looking for a very atmospheric sound. Finally, on the right hand side, before we get to the master volume, we have a drive control. Now, as I understand it, the 750 model was already so loud that it was actually quite difficult to get it to naturally distort before you started upsetting your band members, certainly if you're using some big speaker cabinets. So EBS added a drive control that we can actually add in that natural loud amplifier sound, but actually keep the master volume down. So far, I've been demonstrating the amplifier with it essentially out of the circuit, and we're getting all that lovely, clean clarity and dynamic, powerful sound that we know and love from EBS. But let's dirty it up a little bit. I've dialed in a little sweet spot there where we're getting a tonal difference and maybe just a slight hair of drive, not much at all. I want to make my sound more aggressive, but not actually add in a great deal of obvious distortion. But as we progress the dial, we're actually getting some more mid-range in there as well. So it's a nice way of just bringing a bit of life into what could be a dull sounding instrument. This one's fairly lively already, so I think we're going to be pushing off the dial a little bit. Let's see what that sounds like. Naturally, when I've progressed the drive control round, because it is a gain control, the level naturally goes up. So I've had to pull the master volume control down to compensate for this extra boost. Now, let's not mess around. Let's max that bad boy out and see what happens. Okay, things are falling off my shelf in the background. Superb. Lots and lots of aggressive distortion and volume coming from the amplifier. It's a subtle kind of drive. It's not like a distortion pedal where we can get that searing over the top type drive. This one is meant to sound like an amplifier, like an old valve amplifier, like cranked up, and things are starting to get a bit lively and a bit gritty. I'd like to dial back and just find another little sweet spot there where I can just push the drive just a tad, but not as much as we've got there, because that's really exciting, but I probably wouldn't use it all the time. Yeah, I like that. That is now a setting that I could probably leave on for a rock gig and know that I've got a nice gritty sound, but that would probably meld very, very well with distorted guitars, getting that kind of nice even mix. So my distortion then starts to tie in with the guitar distortion and we get that massive great wall of sound. Nicely voiced. It sounds really, really cool. Finally, master volume on the right hand side. You've probably noticed that this is not very, very high on the dial at the moment, and I have way too much volume in the room. I've got to be careful not to overload my lav mic, but there's enough volume coming off the amplifier that we can hear what we're actually doing, what kind of sound and colour we're creating. Moving the dial further up and further up, it gets louder and louder and louder. The eagle-eyed amongst you have noticed that there is a little 2 ohms symbol just above the volume control, and this is one of the major features of the 752. I'm going to spin that amplifier around in a moment. We'll look at the back panel and talk a little bit more about what's going on behind the amplifier. But one of the features that I particularly like about 752 is a minimum load impedance. It goes from 4 ohms in the 750 down to 2 ohms. This means that I can run 4 8-ohm cabinets off of this amplifier and it won't even break into a sweat. It would be more than happy with driving those. That's brilliant. The cabinets I'm using today, I'm using 2 8-ohm cabinets, but I could actually add a third one and have a 3x12 cabinet combination. And I don't have to do anything. I can just plug in and go. That configuration alone will be absolutely fine. And with the power that we have on board, coming up on screen, we have plenty of power on tap. Reidmar 752. You may have noticed is actually smaller than the 750. So it's a lot easier to move around. So lots of horsepower on tap, and it's a physically smaller amplifier as well. Along with a superb feature set across the front of the amplifier for sculpting our tone, on the back we have all the connections we could possibly need for going live or recording. Left hand side here, mains power switch and our IEC mains input socket. Underneath that, under this little panel here, we can select our regional voltage. So I can take this bad boy on tour with me. I can go to different countries and select my local power supply voltage. Next to this, we have a speak-on output for our speaker connection. I love seeing the speak-on connector on the back of an amplifier. I think gone are the days, hopefully, of little jack sockets, those 1/4-inch jack sockets. Sure, we're going to see them on some of the pocket-size amplifiers. But I like the speak-on because it stops people from using instrument cables by mistake. Again, the label says here you can see between 2 and 8 ohms. So we can go to a minimum impedance load of 2 ohms. That's 2 4-ohm cabinets will make 2 ohms, 4 8-ohm cabinets will make 2 ohms, etc., etc. To the right of that, we have a whole host of jack sockets for connecting external devices. So across the top, we have an effects loop, should we want to put in line level devices or some sort of sound processing after the EQ and compression settings, we have a loop here. Headphone out for silent practice. We can run this amplifier without a cabinet attached. To the right of that, auxiliary input. This is a 1/8 jack or 3.5 millimeters. And I can add in my MP3 player, my drum machine, my laptop, or whatever device is feeding some audio in, and I can hear that along with my bass sound through the headphone jack. Underneath we have 2 sockets for remote control. I was pressing buttons and turning dials earlier on, but the great thing about Reidmar 752 is with the correct foot switch, we can turn on and off 4 different functions. The mute function, the character, the equalization, and the drive section. Obviously the mute is going to be very, very useful for when we're disconnecting, say, an active bass, and we don't want to go bang and clunk through front of house PA and upset our engineer. But certainly in the throes of performance, being able to switch those other functions on and off essentially gives me a 3-channel amplifier. The foot switch is available separately. Next to that, we have a line out. This is a daisy chain output, so should I be crazy enough and want to drive a second 752 with another 4 cabinets, yeah, that sounds like a great idea right here. I really want to try that. Then we can run a line out. That line out could go out to a separate power amplifier, or we could even use it for sending my signal on elsewhere as well. So we've got a really useful line out function. Finally, on the right hand side, we have the standard balanced output DI, and that's running through via an XLR socket. Should I be recording or playing on stage, I can decide whether or not my EQ settings get sent to front of house, or if I just want the bare tone of my bass sent out the DI socket. So over here we have a post EQ button. I can engage that. I'm going to get all of my lovely rich tone settings sent out of the DI. For the purpose of this review, of course I've got that enabled because I need you to hear what happens when I change the settings. I have mixed the sound of the DI output with my speaker cabinet sound, as it has a microphone in front of it, and blending the two to give you the best possible tone so you can hear what this amplifier sounds like. The all metal casing and amplifier weighs in at mere 3.8 kilos, that's 8.3 pounds. And as I mentioned earlier on, for moving this amplifier around, being a downsized shell is going to be really, really useful, but EBS don't mess around. We've even got a handle on the side. Let's spin the amplifier around and have a quick look at that. Nice and solid. It's certainly going to make moving the amplifier around really easily. But of course, you're going to want to put this in a gig bag or a case when you're ready to go back on the road and move to your next venue. I've always been a fan of EBS gear, and having owned the Reidmar 750 and put it through its paces, of course I wanted to know what 752 was capable of, and it's not let me down, has it? It sounds big, it's clear, we can have a lovely hi-fi tone, but by pushing that drive up and putting the treble control down, we can start to get a very vintage gritty sound, and it sounds organic, it actually sounds believable. Sometimes a distortion section going into an amplifier, maybe say a pedal, yeah, it sounds gritty, but it can sound a bit synthetic. And if you're looking for that vintage kind of grind, but still being able to have the advantages of not taking a massive valve amplifier with you, then I think 752 is going to be definitely one on your shopping list to go and try out. Of course, there's going to be limitations to the sounds that I can produce in a video for you. So as always, it's going to be down to you to get in front of one of these and crank it up with, say, your normal bass and decide how it works for you. It works for me. It's great. Great amplifier. I always say this, there is a written review to go with this video. So if you've been watching this on YouTube, please go over to bassgearmagazine.com and you can go and check out my written review to go with this as well. I'll put a little bit more information in and to support the video. I've been Dan Veal, thanks ever so much for watching, and I will be bringing you some more reviews again soon, so check them out.